This is the second video on Chapter 20, America's Hyperpower. So we were just talking about some of the aftermath of the terrorist attacks of 9/11. So one of the problems that the government realized at that point, again, we're talking about the federal government, was that there was a lack of coordination and cooperation. So we have a whole lot of different agencies that are responsible for national security, defense of the United States. For example, the FBI, CIA, NSC, right, National Security Council, Defense Department, Justice Department, right, all these different groups involved in we call Homeland Security. So you can see one of the issues that they had that they realized about 9/11 was that not only were a lot of these agencies not talking with one another, sharing information, best practices, that type of thing. But maybe in some instances, they would even be in competition. Say if the FBI and CIA were going off after the same terrorist, maybe one agency would actually withhold information from the other, right? Because they wanted to kind of be the ones that would get the credit for capturing that terrorist. So one of the things that the Bush administration did directly following 9/11 was the creation of the Department of Homeland Security in 2002. So this is our most recent department that has been added to the executive branch oversight. Another issue we see here in the post 9/11 period, where there was this sense or perspective from the Bush administration that they still wanted to focus on what we call traditional state actors. So President Bush, in particular, really had a hard time believing that the 9/11 terrorist attacks had been perpetrated by bin Laden and Al Qaeda. He and others in his administration were absolutely determined that that had come as a result from Saddam Hussein, Iraq, and other, again, state actors. So our government had a hard time, really, thinking about that idea that a non-state actor like Al Qaeda could have perpetrated that kind of attack on us. They were still focused on, again, more this traditional idea of another nation state attacking us. So also in the 9/11 period, Congress granted the president broad authority to combat terrorism, right? So we see things like the USA Patriot Act, which of course entailed all types of different surveillance and security measures designed to protect Americans. All right. So then going to war. So what happened here, right? So one of the things that was sort of an unfortunate consequence was this sort of international goodwill was squandered quickly. So a lot of places around around the world were showed a lot of goodwill towards the United States, right? Like so, countries around the world, major cities, all said that they were in solidarity with the United States, right? People were horrified at the terrorist attack. So one of the things that I think we often forget about 9/11 is that there was people from all over the world that were killed in those terrorist attacks, right? New York City, Washington D.C., right? Philadelphia, the plane that went down in Pennsylvania. There was a lot of people from other countries that were also killed on that day. It was not by any means, 100% American citizens. So a lot of places around the world definitely felt a connection, a solidarity to to those events, right? So I said this earlier, so Bush kind of get more of a kind of you're with us or against us. So your book calls this sort of a stark and tactless warning. Kind of, where again a lot of our allies in particular were sort of found that very off-putting. And I said, well, we're not going to be lockstep behind every little thing that you want to do. World doesn't work like that. So then we're also talking about this issue. It says war managers made crucial errors that turn tactical success into strategic failure, right? So again, tactical will be sort of the closest level it's on the ground, overtaking a village, something like that. But then strategy, of course, would be the highest level. So even though we had some successes more at the tactical, often those resulted in strategic failures. All right. So what happened here? Some of the main figures related to Al Qaeda, right? Osama bin Laden and Mullah Omar, right? They escaped into Pakistan. They were in Afghanistan and then some of the mountains there, and then made their way into Pakistan, right? So then, of course, we know later on that bin Laden was captured at this house in Pakistan, right, by U.S. Special Forces soldiers. So in the post 9/11 period, not only did the United States go to war in Afghanistan, but this is one of the most poorest, the least developed countries, not only in that region but really in the world. So not only was there sort of this effort of going to war, but the United States also engaged in what we call nation building, right? Trying to sort of build up a country, its institutions, its infrastructure, all these kind of things. But the idea was, well, we didn't maybe go in to the level that really needed to, right? So this is why it was called nation building light, where the preparations were inadequate, the funds were insufficient, other sort of problems as far as how that war was executed, starting in 2002. So if you click on this in your slide deck, you'll see this is the 2002 National Security Strategy, right? So you can see that this has a real strong neocon flavor to it, right? About how the United States is going to be more aggressive around the world, promoting its interests, promoting democracy, a lot of stuff that really fit into that neocon worldview. All right, so one of the things that came out really soon after the 9/11 attacks. So you see January 2002 in his State of the Union address, right, that the president gives every year. So in the '02 address, President Bush actually called these three countries, Iran, Iraq, and North Korea, he named them the axis of evil. So again, this sort of naming the enemy here, right? So kind of connecting, again, some of this stuff like the global war on terror, right, GWAT, with this sort of danger of nuclear proliferation, which of course would have been most relevant to North Korea and the dictatorship there. So a lot of this period was also focused on what we call WMD, or weapons of mass destruction, right? Because again, the Bush administration, was pretty sure, determined to find that Saddam Hussein, for example, in Iraq was pursuing a weapons of mass destruction program, be it nuclear or biological, whatever. So there was this idea that we have to go into Iraq, we have to maybe become more interventionist around the world to prevent the development and spread and proliferation of WMD. So I did want to point out to you, there's this kind of comedy tour almost related to this sort of stuff, right? There was actually a group of comedians in kind of this neck of the woods that just sort of, again, taken a pun sort of out of that name, actually called themselves Axis of Evil. So we'll show you a bit of that in class probably. All right. So then what about actually going to war here, right? So again, this is a good quote from your book. The principles of military preeminence, unilateralism, and preemptive war departed sharply from the realism of the first Bush administration and the basic principles that had guided Cold War strategy, right? So of course they're talking about Bush's father here, right? Again, from 89 to 93. So he was much more of a realist, right? Focusing on the struggle for power, that kind of thing. So, realism again is about struggle for power, but it's also about your own interests, right? Don't be stupid about it. You don't want to give the other side an advantage, right? So again, using things like or being unilateral, perhaps pursuing preemptive war, those are kind of things that the first George H.W. Bush administration would not exactly have been so excited about. So we just talked about in the previous slide this 2002 National Security Strategy. Really was, we call this sort of major transformation in American grand strategy. All right. So like some of the other presidencies and related to their foreign policies, we see the development of what a lot of folks call the Bush Doctrine. So this guy Hoffman calls it Wilsonianism in boots, sort of more this aggressive preemptive doctrine, that the United States was going to get involved around the world. If there was credible intelligence that our security would be threatened, that we would not hesitate to intervene, right? That we would do whatever was necessary to keep America safe. All right. So if you remember during that time, like we kind of looked at we talked about the suspiciousness, the fear, the paranoia around the Cold War during the Cold War period, that sort of Cold War culture that developed, in the United States, sort of the fear of the Soviet Union, communism, nuclear war, all those type of things. Also had that during this period in the United States. Of course, since the United States had been attacked on 9/11, a lot of folks were worried about, well, what's going to happen next? When's the next time we're going to get attacked? So there really was this total focus on security, much more than than other issues. So a lot of civil liberties advocates said that those liberties were getting trampled upon in the name of national security. All right, so then we kind of see this shift in focus from Afghanistan, right, where Bin Laden and Al Qaeda and all those guys were, to Iraq. Again, they didn't believe that it was just Al Qaeda that had perpetrated those attacks. So as you can see, this is another good quote from your book. For the neocons, for the neoconservatives, war satisfied deep philosophical convictions as well as immediate practical concerns. Right? They knew Saddam Hussein was a bad guy and he was up to bad stuff, and we needed to get him. All right. So there's also, this is more related. We've talked in this course about the identity or the idealist perspective of international relations. So you can see that would probably be the one that was most attached to George W. Bush, right? This idea that U.S. should oppose tyranny, should spread democracy. Again, the sort of values and ideas component coming in there. So not only did they believe that we could go into the Middle East and be successful, but they even believed that a sort of a reversed domino effect was possible in the Middle East, where we could kind of reverse the sort of trend of authoritarianism and kind of what they saw as backwardness and hatred and all those type of things, and even and bring democracy and kind of a more westernized perspective on government to the region. So again, they saw this major link between Saddam Hussein, of course, the dictator in Iraq, and international terrorism, because again, he did say, and we did have some credible evidence that they were seeking weapons of mass destruction, but of course, we see in the end that some of that intelligence was faulty, and that the programs were nowhere near to the level that the administration thought they were. All right, so this is returning back a little more to his personality. So it talks about combining sort of Old West mentality of his native Texas with the missionary spirit of evangelical Christianity. So Bush, kind of like Truman, was maybe not particularly a deep thinker, could be remarkably ill-informed on various issues. So one of the other problems that a lot of people looked at with the Bush administration is he had a whole lot of folks around him that had extraordinarily similar worldviews, that there was not enough dissenting opinions around Bush. So, for example, Colin Powell, that we looked at earlier, who was Secretary of State during his first term, was deeply opposed to a lot of things that the administration wanted to do, but oftentimes he was sort of not listened to, or they sort of disregarded a lot what he had to say. So this is just more about Bush from the individual level of analysis. He's born-again Christian, so he sort of preferred these kind of good versus evil outlook, again, that kind of binary thing. So a lot of people thought it was a little comical at the time. He said, we'll rid the world of evildoers. So this sort of harkened back or was familiar to a lot of people, sort of the old Batman TV shows from the 1960s and things, where they sort of talked about evildoers and these kind of things. Now, again, of course, a group like Al Qaeda could easily be seen as evildoers, but we would not have expected, President Clinton or H.W. Bush or even Barack Obama to say something like that. Again, that much more connected to George W. Bush. All right, so we're furthering a little bit more on this neocon political ideology. So those of you that had the political ideology course, you can see the importance of that and how it relates to some of the foreign policy decisions, at this time in particular. So this idea they were certain of what they knew, even in the face of contrary evidence and inconvenient facts. So often when we think about ideology, remember we have this idea that it's mutually reinforcing, where whatever you believe. So just real quick, an ideology is a value or belief system held as truth by a group of people. So they're going to bring in or sort of attract themselves to things that are more positive to that ideology, that sort of support that ideology, and then reject things that kind of are negative to it. So, for example, there's also this term called cherry picking. So say if there's 100 pieces of evidence, the idea is, well, you might just pick those that are that help sort of suit your preconceptions and goals, what works for you. So we'll end here and continue on in the next video.